Sounds good.
Okay, Derl. We've talked in our first interview, and we finished with you first arriving in country, and you arrive on 2 June 1967. So, what was your impression of Vietnam in terms of the weather and the climate?
Well, I tell you, when I landed in Vietnam, it was quite scary because the plane that I was on that took me to in country was a C-130, and they landed on an airstrip that it was a makeshift airstrip. It was just pieces of metal laid out. It was so rough. I thought we had crashed. We were just, jarred around all over the airplane. And then when we finally got off, it was so hot and humid and it smelled so bad. And it was at night. And of course, the bombs were going off and I could hear firing. And thinking, what am I doing here? you know, it was pretty scary. And we were shuffled off into a bunker where we spent the night, not knowing what the next day was going to bring. We were just, waiting to see what to do, where to go, and where to be assigned to. And it was actually my first impression when I looked out of the airplane, because we came into Da Nang and then, shuffled around. But anyway, it looked like a vacation spot. All the trees and everything, except for the holes in the ground. There were a lot of bomb craters. But yeah, it was pretty scary going in, because we just didn't know what we were going into.
Well, and especially with you eventually being assigned to 1-9, because 1-9 was hit pretty hard in some Khe Sanh Hill fighting as well prior to your arrival.
Oh yeah, they've been wiped out a time or two before I got there, and everybody that I talked to on the way in was telling me that not. I was pretty sure I was going to a Third Marine Division, but I didn't know what company. And everybody was telling me, "Don't go to Bravo because they're always in the action, and they've been wiped out a couple of times." Of course, I didn't have any choice. That's where they put me.
Well, and getting up to that as well, I mean, you've got the First Marine Division's in country with the First, the Fifth, and the Seventh Regiments. You've got
Mhm.
Third Mardiv in country with the Third, Ninth Marines. You've got the 26th Marines as well, and eventually the 27th Marines get added in there. The Fourth Marines are also operating up north. I mean, there's a lot of action from the DMZ all the way down south to the rice paddies.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, and the 26th Marines were, I think they were pretty much in the areas that we were, because we run into them every once in a while.
Well, and getting to this, so you go from Da Nang to Dong Ha, and you eventually, get assigned to the Ninth Marines. And even then, did you know that you were going to First Battalion, Ninth Marines, specifically Bravo?
I didn't know that until I was assigned. Actually, they assigned it to me when I got to uh, Dong Ha. I mean, they just told us to go to Dong Ha. We had to walk about a mile to get there the next day. And once we got there, it was just a few tents and a bunch of guys, hanging around looking like they've been through no telling what. Their clothes were worn out and they were dirty, and here we are in our new outfits. And we looked like the new guys, and that's what we were. And they were there was a group of guys sitting over there, and they had a big old block of ice, and they invited us over to have some ice, and they were chipping it off with their bayonets. And we didn't know where that ice came from because the water over there is not that clean. But it was cold, so they were loving it, and it was okay. I don't think any of us got sick, but yeah, and then they had some makeshift showers. They had PVC pipes together just out in the open with holes in them, and that was an exciting shower out there, naked for everybody to see. And but anyway, we stayed there that night, and then the next morning we were out on our first mission.
Wow. Now, Dong Ha itself, describe Dong Ha and the makeup of it for this combat base there.
Yeah, Dong Hall, it wasn't too much really. I mean, like I say, it had a few hooches and some tents, and but that was our that's where we had our company command right there for at first. It did change later, and I didn't spend a whole lot of time there other than coming into there, and then I think we came back one time, but it was just out close to the DMZ, and it was one of the stations out there, and they existed pretty, I guess, the whole time we were there and after.
Well, and I know that you mentioned this in our previous interview, but it's also stated in your book that when you're assigned to Bravo 19, you're assigned as a 60 millimeter mortar man, and even though you were
Right,
trained on 81 millimeters.
that's right. Yeah, I told them when I got there, I said, I'm an 81 millimeter mortars. And they said, well, that's too bad because we don't need any, but we do need 60s. And so that's when they assigned me to 60s. And I was in the 60 millimeter mortar section from then on.
Well, and I find it interesting in your book that you mentioned that you had told Marilyn, of course, that you would be with 81s and that 81s didn't go out with the line companies, the 81s were behind the lines. And you specifically mentioned that it was another broken promise because there wasn't a need for 81 millimeter mortarmen at the time.
That's right. Yeah, I told her not to worry because I'm going to be behind the guys, giving them support. And when I got there and found that out, and the other thing was, she was worried about I'm kind of directionally challenged, and so when I got there, they gave me a map and a compass, or a map, a map and a compass, and told me I would be plotting some of the firing missions. And I had no idea what was going on. I didn't know if I could read that map, but and of course, I had another confession. I had to tell her, well, I'm going to have to find my way. But and it didn't take too long because over there it's a lot different from here. I mean, you got mountains and rivers and whatever, rather than streets and all over here. So it's a different adoption.
Well, and I found it interesting too that when you mention getting the map and plotting these fires for people who have never been around a mortar or have never done the research around a mortar, I mean, you've got to plot night defensive fires when you're in night positions. You've got to plot harassing and interjection fires. I mean, there's a lot
Right.
of math and computation that has to go into it, and this was before calculators.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, we just, I don't know, we just figure it out, and usually what would happen is we could see where we were firing, where it was dropping, and we could see if we need to move it over, an elevation this way or that way, or up, every which way we needed to go. We could kind of see. We had spotters kind of watching. Usually we were our own spotters, but anyway, yeah.
Well, and you mentioned in the book too that you get issued your 782 gear. You get your flak jacket, you get a pack, you have of course ammunition pouches that you're carrying plus your M16, and then on top of that, as mortar guys, you've got to hump the tripod, you've got to hump the actual mortar tube and the ammo. So how much extra gear are you carrying?
You're carrying a lot. We were carrying, each one of us was carrying an additional 5 to 6 rounds, which are like 3 pounds a piece. And we did that for the first month or so. And then we discovered we needed to let every platoon person carry just one. And then we didn't have to carry all of them. And so when we'd stop and wherever we stopped, they'd just come by and drop off the rounds if we were going to be there for a day or so. And so we'd have plenty of mortar rounds at that point. Early on, it was kind of scarce.
And I was about to make the comment that your ammo, of course, is now quadrupled, if not more, due to the fact that it's spread out amongst the rifle platoons.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we'd have a nice pile.
Now, ammo wise, I know the primary ammo usage would be high explosives for the 60 millimeters, but would you carry any Willie Peter rounds for marking?
We would carry a few, but not very many. We mostly carried the explosion rounds because usually somebody else would spot where we were needing to drop them.
Now, speaking of this, and I'm going to add this in here for our viewers, the term Willie Peter refers to white phosphorus, and it's generally used as a marking round, but you can use it to burn enemies out. But it explodes and creates this white mushroom almost of fire, kind of that burns through an area, incredibly hot as well. Great for marking,
Right.
can be used on the battlefield if necessary.
Right, you can.
Now, would the spotters have a RTO attached to each mortar section, calling in the adjustments as necessary?
Not really, not really. We did have some forward observers, which were more so for the 81s than the 60s. But we did use them some. Usually we were just using because we knew where they were, pretty much, and we'd start dropping rounds. And as far as spotters, we were pretty much the spotters ourselves.
Well, and operating where you were, that makes a lot of sense with the DMZ, the McNamara Strip. I mean, you've got a lot of, in many ways, open terrain through there to where you can spot your own rounds as the 60 millimeter guys.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that came in handy. And there were a lot of brush as well. So we didn't always know, but usually we could figure out where if we heard mortars being popped, to send to us, we could usually pinpoint to where they were. It may take a few rounds, but we could figure out where they were. And usually, well, a lot of times we'd find them before they left, but they didn't hang around very long. They drop rounds and then move. So it's kind of hard to keep up with them. They didn't like to hang around very long.
I'm sure, because I mean, with a section was 2 mortars, and then generally speaking, with a company, you'd have what, 6 60s out there or 4?
Well, usually we were supposed to have 3. That's all we ever had, the most that we ever had. At one point, well, after Buffalo, we only had 1 for a period of time. We finally got back up, later on, as we added more Marines and finally got back up to 3 mortars. But probably the most of the time I was there, we had 2, and yeah, because they were just hard to get.
Well, that, and even then, carrying the mortar, I mean, you still have to carry an M16 or at the bare minimum a 45 for defense purposes.
Yeah, if you carry the tripods, your assistant gunner, and you carry your rifle, and that's kind of hard to do. If you're the gunner, you carry a 45 pistol and the barrel and the base plate, which is it's a pretty heavy little thing to carry around.
Oh, I'm most definitely sure of that, especially walking around in the heat and humidity of the DMZ area of South Vietnam. I mean, it's, in many ways, it's got to be hot. It's got to be the shoulder straps biting into your shoulders after time and aching. I'm sure it's a lot. You hump what you have to.
Oh yeah, that's the reason we had a lot of jungle rot, because we had all those straps and all binding as we moved. Yeah.
Now, regarding when you initially got in country, you of course are an assistant carrying the tripod and the M16. So what was your opinion of the M16 at this time in the summer of 1967?
I had no idea at the time, other than I realized it was a lot lighter to carry, and so I wasn't sure how it was going to work. But then after using it in battle a few times, and especially Buffalo, we realized it wasn't ready, because we had guys being killed just left and right because their rifles were jamming. They had real problems with them at first. I'm pretty sure they're perfected now because they're still using them.
Most definitely. Well, I know the summer of 1967, it's pretty pivotal for the Marine Corps in South Vietnam. You've got Operation Union, you've got Operation Union 2, you have Operation Buffalo in July, and then you eventually run into Operation Swift in September. And a lot of the Marines were found with their cleaning rods in their barrels, and they had been killed at point blank range because their rifles had jammed.
Right. Yes, we had a lot of that. At one point, when I was actually carrying the 45 pistol, I was looking for an M16, and they were laying everywhere with the dead guys, and I couldn't find one that worked. So pretty well stuck with my 45.
Well, 45, although can be an accurate range, that's a 45 caliber slug, and up close, it's a devastating weapon.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And you can hit pretty good up close, but the distance you don't have.
Now, regarding, if I'm not mistaken, with our timeline here, it'd be June the 4th to the 5th. You go out on your first combat patrol with Bravo Company.
Right.
Now, the mortars themselves, when you would go out on a combat mission or a patrol, search and destroy, where would the mortars be in the company file or the platoon file?
We would be attached to one of the platoons, usually right in the middle somewhere, probably with second platoon more than any. Yeah, because we were always attached to a platoon, and we always had anywhere from 6 to 12 guys, depending on how many mortars we had at the time.
Well, and with that, I know you mentioned in the book that Bravo Company centered around 150 active duty Marines serving in the company in itself. And when you guys are in file on these patrols and combat missions, 150 Marines can stretch over a very lengthy strip of territory.
That's true. Yeah, very true. And sometimes we just went out with a platoon. We didn't always go out with the whole company. But it could stretch out a pretty good distance.
Well, and I know you mentioned this in the book itself, but your first day in country, you actually were hit by mortars. The company was in itself, and nobody was killed that day.
That's right. Nobody was even injured. And then come to find out, it was our own people that were throwing the mortars.
So
then,
do you know how that happened? Was that a miscommunication? What?
Yeah, I'm sure it was. I never did know for sure, but I'm sure that's what happened. Yeah.
Well, and with that too, I mean, it's a stroke of luck. It's fate. It's perhaps, of course, with your beliefs, God interacting and protecting you, and as well as your fellow Marines on this day. But if I'm not mistaken, the next day you had your first encounter with a firefight, an ambush.
We did. We walked into a U-shaped ambush, and of course we were just caught in it with no place to go. We had to find our way out, and we did. We ended up calling in airstrikes, and ended up taking care of the enemy. I think we had one of our Marines were killed during that time, and I think we had about 8 others that were wounded. And we captured 2 of them and sent them in to be interrogated.
Well, and I'll touch on the prisoners because I read in your book what you witnessed. But prior to that in itself, when the shooting starts, what's that like from your perspective of being under the fire the first time?
It was it was really difficult because, I mean, we just had to find a safe place, a place where the bullets wasn't hitting. And we were trying to get in the tree lines, and there were some bomb craters around that we jumped in, and just trying to get to a defensive position, where we could defend ourselves. And that you get your wounded just right off the bat because you're trying to figure out what to do, where to go, and the firing is coming in. And so we had I think my squad leader at that point had been wounded twice, and he was thinking, if I could just get a light wound, and he stick his hand up, and he said, I can go home. But anyway, and that did happen. But yeah, it's pretty scary. I mean, you don't really think about you're not thinking about being scared. You're just trying to do what you have to do, and you just want to survive. Yeah.
Well, and I'm sure the sound of battle is indescribable, but it's deafening. I mean, you've got the ambush in itself, you've got AK-47s, perhaps you've got 7.62 machine guns firing at you, plus you've got M16s going off, M60s, you've got M79s. I mean, with that all around you, it's got to be chaotic, it's got to be confusing, and in many ways, like you've mentioned, it is terrifying because any moment the bullet that has your name on it could come flying through. You don't know that.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, and it just takes a little bit to get control, and figure out what you're doing, what you need to do. And like you say, you just never know. I mean, we went that whole time knowing that could happen, but I felt pretty confident that I was going to return home for at least the first part of my. Except there were an occasion or two during Buffalo that I was doubting a little bit. Well, is it really going to happen? But of course I knew I had my wife and my family back home praying all the time, which really made a lot of difference. Yeah.
Well, one of the things that I like that you mentioned is the aspect of you taking control of the situation. And that's one of the things that I've ran into when I talk to Marines who served in combat is they refer to their training is that everything that had been taught to them up to that point allowed them to control their emotions and take over, and they were able to do their job as they were expected to.
That's right. And follow orders, when they say take that hill, we're going to take that hill. I say, whoa, wait a minute. Not sure that's what I want to do today, but just follow orders is the main thing. Because hopefully the one in charge knows what he's doing.
Well, and that goes down to your senior NCOs, the squad leaders, and hopefully, the officers, your platoon leaders, your company commanders, because they hope that they're making the right decision in the heat of battle. And the tide of battle is always changing. I mean, nothing is concrete because you have the fog of war.
That's right. And it's not always the same situation. Yeah.
Now, in this first firefight, did you fire your weapon in that first engagement?
Yeah, we were all just firing at whatever we could see, and there was a lot of them were in the brush that we couldn't see, but we were just filling it with firing, and hopefully get them or scare them, one or the other, and they didn't scare too easy. And finally, when we realized it was not going too well, that's when our commander called in airstrikes.
Now, seeing these airstrikes come in, I mean, what distance from your position is the ambush taking place at? 100 meters, 200 meters?
It's kind of hard to remember. It was I thought it was close, but it was far enough apart that we could call in airstrikes, and when it was over, we had to go in and clean out the area and check for what was in there to see what had happened. And like I say, it pretty much had killed all the enemy, either we had or the bomb had. And there were still two that were hiding in there that we found, and of course they were sent back for interrogation.
Well, and leading up to that too, what is it like seeing jets, fast movers from either the Navy, the Marine Corps, the Air Force, flying over at low level, dropping napalm or 500-pound bombs?
It's quite extraordinary. You're happy to see them, but yet you're hoping they drop them in the right place. Yeah, they've saved our bacon many times. So it's you're always glad to have them. And I don't know how far you read, but we did have one incident where they dropped them in our location at Conti, but that didn't happen too often.
Well, and with that too, I mean, from the perspective of a fighter pilot, they're doing 400 or 500 miles an hour, aiming for a spot of green and diving in from 1,000 feet. I wouldn't want that job. I mean, there's a lot of room for error in a job field like
Oh
that,
yeah, a
especially
lot
in
of room,
1967.
a lot of room for error. And I don't want to jump ahead, but in the airstrikes during Operation Buffalo, they were just coming in really low and dropping a lot of power. Matter of fact, I could look up and see the pilot as he went by, and one of them, I thought he gave me the thumbs up. I wasn't sure. I had to look again, but and they were dropping stuffs pretty much in our position because that's where the enemy were, and that's what we had called in pretty much on our position.
Well, and one of the things that tactic wise, the NVA were focusing on in 1967 was to try to get as close to Marine rifle companies in close quarters combat so that you Marines couldn't use air support. That way, the NVA had a better chance of inflicting as many casualties as possible.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. They were good at that. They
Now,
really were.
this first firefight, getting it back to our timeline, it ends, and you have to go through the finding bodies, bomb damage assessments. And you mentioned these two prisoners. Now, were these prisoners pretty big Vietnamese men, or were they standard size?
They were pretty much standard for Vietnamese, which is not that big. None of them are really big. And yeah, they were, I don't know, I'd guess them probably 100 and maybe 110 pounds or so.
Now, equipment wise, do you remember what kind of equipment that these prisoners had when they were found?
They had their AK-47s, yeah, and ammo. That was all taken, and that's mainly what I remember. Yeah.
Now, in the field, what would the policy be when you took prisoners and you found ammo and weapons? Would you try to break them, or would you put them in a hole and set off an explosive?
Well, it depended on if we were out in the bush like that. Usually we just blow them up and get rid of them. If there were if there was a good way to save them and take them back somewhere, I don't know where they took them, but usually we just use a block of C4 and blow them up along with whatever. A lot of times we'd find duds of bombs. I mean, big bombs, 200-pound, 500-pound, and we would dig a hole, put them in it, and put the C4 in and blow it. So otherwise, they'd use it against us. They'd rig it, make a trap out of it some way or another.
Well, and one of the things that I've talked to other veterans about, Marine and Army alike that were in Vietnam, is that the Vietnamese were very skilled at making traps out of unexploded ordnance, and they had devastating effects on American patrols that found them.
For sure, for sure. And we had a lot of dud rounds, and I think they're still finding them over there today. Yeah.
I think that's one of the things that perhaps a lot of people don't understand is the Vietnam War still impacts the country of Vietnam to this day by the amount of unexploded munitions in that country.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. From what I understand, they're finding them pretty often and having to do something with them.
Well, in many ways you have to. I mean, it's a hazard even today. I know that parts of Europe still are impacted by World War One and Two with the amount of exploded ordnance there.
Yeah. Yeah. And you don't know whether they're still going to work or not.
Absolutely. Now, regarding the prisoners and the wounded, you've called in medevac birds. Would the prisoners be put on the same bird as the wounded, or would it be a different one?
Well, they would be on the same ones unless there were more than one. If there were enough, they'd separate them, but otherwise, they just put them on the same one.
And then in the book, you mentioned that when the helicopter was exiting out of the LZ, the ad hoc LZ at the time, that one of the prisoners was tossed out of the bird, and you don't know if that was for interrogation purposes or if they fell. So what do you remember from seeing that?
Well, I just looked up and I seen him coming out of the helicopter, and They said he fell out, but I kind of assumed that I don't think he'd just fall out of the helicopter or jump out. And in my own mind, I was thinking they were probably interrogating them and they wouldn't talk, so they just threw one of them out. And I don't know that for a fact, but that was what I suspected.
Well, and I'm sure you weren't the only one that suspected that either, because it is suspicious to see a single Viet Cong and VA prisoner come out of a helicopter that they shouldn't have fallen out of with the ramp in itself.
Right. That's right.
And so from that point there, the prisoners have been taken out. Well, then what happens for Derl Horn? What's the rest of the day like?
Well, the rest of that day, we just regrouped and cleaned up the area kind of and headed on out to complete the rest of our mission, which we were just on a search and destroy mission, looking for the enemy, looking for any things that they had set up, any bunkers or weapons or whatever we could run onto. And that was kind of our mission at the time.
Yeah. Now, for this duration, how long would you be in the field on that first combat patrol?
Seemed like forever, but it was, I would say probably a couple of weeks we were out in the field. And we never did go in very long to a location. We were just mostly out probably 90% of the time.
Now, in the field in itself, just for viewers' purposes, what would you do about food and water?
Well, we always carried sea rations and water, and we would we'd carry about 3 or 4 days worth of sea rations, which is not a light thing to carry. And as far as the water, we would carry 2, 4, 5 canteens of water, whatever we felt that we could carry. And when we were getting low, then they either would resupply us with water and sea rations, or we would just find streams and refill them with and put halazone tablets in to kill the germs. That's mostly what we did with our water.
Now, speaking of the water and the halazone tablets, does that add a unique taste to the canteen in itself with those tablets?
It really does. It doesn't help the taste at all. It tastes kind of like quinine, or it gives it a medicine taste. But you need the moisture, so it was a good thing to have.
Well, and I know some Marines that I've talked to, they mentioned getting a hold of Kool-Aid packets and putting that in their canteens when they went out. Did you do any of that?
I did some of that. I wasn't too crazy about it because it didn't seem to quench my thirst as well. It's just water. But yeah, I did some of that. My wife sent me some. Yeah.
Now, did you have a favorite flavor of Kool-Aid packets you preferred?
Probably strawberry or grape. Strawberry is still my favorite.
I do love strawberry Kool-Aid. I mean, it's definitely a favorite of mine in the summertime.
Yeah, strawberry jelly.
Oh, absolutely. Strawberry jam. And it leads into one of my favorite questions to ask Marines in particular is that, did you have a favorite sea ration?
Probably my favorite would have been beads and weenies. Yeah. And I had a usually in sea rations there was a little can of peanut butter, a real small can. And I love peanut butter. And what I do a lot of times, I just mix my peanut butter in whatever I had, and just stir it in. And it gave it a little bit of a peanut butter flavor.
No. I know.
I called it my own sea ration hash.
Well, I know that with some of those sea rations, I mean, they're just terrible. I mean, you have to do anything you can to make it edible. I know that in talking to Marines over the past year, that one of the fan favorites was definitely ham and lima beans. I just know that Marines absolutely love that.
Yeah, I don't know about loving it, but you know, when you're hungry, any of it's okay. Yeah, we probably ate sea rations 90% of the time when I was over there.
Well, and it brings me to a question of, you're out in the field, you eat your sea rations. So what do you do with the cans? Because I know that the Vietnamese would also use the cans as a part of the IEDs they would set up by putting grenades in them to create more shrapnel.
Yeah. Well, the holes that we dug, our foxholes, we'd throw all of our cans and trash and stuff in it and cover it back up. And so if they wanted them, they'd have to dig them out. We usually left whenever we stopped. When we left it pretty clean. We'd throw everything, all the trash in holes and cover them up.
Well, and part of the reason that you have to do that is that any Viet Cong or NVA unit that's looking to set up an ambush or at least try to relay information, evidence of your trash and being here, that's an easy way to track you and find you.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah. And we've even been known to dig them up ourselves, because when you're out of sea rations for 2 or 3 days, you're looking for something to eat, and sometimes you throw stuff away. Sometimes, if a Marine doesn't like ham and limas or whatever, sometimes you can find a can that hadn't been opened.
And
Yeah,
when you're haven't had any food for 2 or 3 days, I mean, anything's good, right?
that's right. Yeah. And
Now,
there wasn't a whole lot of fruit. We did run onto fruit occasionally. One type of fruit that we found it was like a grapefruit, but it had a really thick peeling, and it was real bitter, but it was filling. And so sometimes we'd find those, and we'd eat those.
well, and it prompts me to ask this question: that how often would you go without food in the field before you could get a resupply?
Usually not more than 2 or 3 days. Yeah, they'd come in with, if they could get to us, they'd come in with the choppers. They rarely ever touch down. They just get close and kick them out, because anytime they came in where we were, they'd draw fire. And so they just kick them out, and then we'd run out and grab them and run back to our foxholes and wait for the firing to stop or the mortars to stop.
Well, and speaking of this too, a lot of people might not understand this, but 2 or 3 days without food is a long time out in the field. So what would lead for you guys to run out of food and not get a resupply? Would it be weather? Would it be combat situations?
Well, during the monsoon season, it was a weather problem. But a lot of times we were just out and we being had been in some firefights or whatever, and we just ended up being out longer actually than we'd planned, and there was quite a ways back, so we would end up using up all of our supplies, or pretty much, and eventually we would be resupplied eventually. I mean, that wasn't something that happened real often.
But even then, though, I mean, when you're out in the field without food, waiting on that resupply, I mean, it must feel like forever that waiting on the bird to come in because it's hot. You need food because you're possibly getting dehydrated. I mean, it's got to be horrible.
Oh yeah, the one thing you couldn't run out of was water. You're out of water, you're in big trouble. And,
Now, did that ever happen to you when you were in the field with Bravo 19?
never ran out of water. Sometimes the water was so hot you couldn't hardly drink it, and sometimes it was so dirty you didn't want to drink it. But we usually found water somewhere, some way.
Well, and it leads me to this because it's mentioned in your book, that not eating or not drinking could kill you in Vietnam due to the weather and the conditions. But
Mm-hmm.
you mentioned that it's not just the NVA or the Viet Cong that are trying to kill you, that the environment can easily kill you out there as well.
Oh yeah, yeah, with the snakes and tigers and scorpions, and I mean, we'd be in a foxhole in a battle, and the scorpions are crawling around, and you're trying to avoid them as well. And had one guy that was I noticed he had a scorpion on his back, and I was trying to let him know he had one back there. Finally figured it out, and he just about went crazy. But you didn't want to be stung; it'd make you sick.
Well, with that, I know you yourself, you had a run-in with a snake as well on a patrol.
I did, yeah. It was a huge snake, and I didn't know what was going to happen. But we had found this village area, and we'd sent some patrol up to check it out. But we were waiting for an okay, to move, and we were instructed not to make any noise and not to fire weapons or anything. And so this snake just kind of rose up out of the weeds and started heading in my direction. And I'm thinking, what am I going to do with this thing? And I knew I couldn't fire my weapon. So I got out my bayonet, and I thought, well, maybe I can take his head off before he gets me. And so I was just patiently, not very patiently, but I was waiting. And he got within, I don't know, probably 10, 20 yards of me. And then he just looked at me and turned and went the other way. A sigh of relief.
Well, and from what I can gather, you're not very fond of snakes neither.
No, I don't like snakes. I like dead snakes.
Well, and in the book, you mentioned in itself that it wasn't just death you had to worry about. You had to worry about guys twisting ankles on patrol, rolling ankles, fatigue. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of factors that I think the general public doesn't understand about being in the field in Vietnam. It's not always combat, but you still have to be weary and you have to pay attention. Otherwise, you've got people with sprained ankles, broken legs. I mean, anything can happen.
Yeah, heat strokes, all kinds of issues. And one guy broke his shoulder when he was trying to get out of fire and get in the hole, and he jumped in and broke his shoulder. And just any and everything can happen. And then those kind of things are not wounds, but they still have to be medevaced and worked on.
Well, I was just about to ask. I mean, with an individual with a broken shoulder in a firefight, do they become a priority, or is it those that have been wounded and are in more serious condition? I mean, how do you take care of a guy with a broken shoulder when you got other guys wounded?
Yeah, well, of course, you tend to the wounded first. The broken shoulder, you can suffer through it, but usually there'd be 2 or 3, and we could get them all out, including the broken shoulder guy. Yeah.
Well, and speaking of aid and treatment, how many corpsmen would typically be attached to Bravo Company, and then of course the 3 platoons?
They usually tried to have a corpsman with each platoon, and so you could have several corpsmen. Probably never enough, but and like everything else, there was always a shortage. I think we ended up having one. Well, we had 2 at one point in our company, wow, which we should have had several. So you didn't always get what you wanted.
Well, that, and I know that at least for a lot of the guys that I've talked to that were in the 5th Marines, clothing was often a shortage too. With the jungle situation and conditions, you go through those fatigues very quickly. They get worn out, they get jungle rot in them. So how would you get a new supply of uniforms? Was that often, or was that also in short supply?
It was not often. I would say maybe 3 or 4 weeks. And by that time, we pretty well worn out what we have. And we no longer wore underclothes or socks because we've, worn them out and they're filthy. And the clothes, a lot of the clothes, the guys, they're just ragged. I mean, they've been torn. They've been, they've just fallen apart. It's like I remember sitting in a bunker, and I'm thinking, I don't want to touch my pants because I'm sweating and it's going to make mud, because there's so much dirt. but you just deal with it. You know, and you deal with each situation.
Well, and you mentioned the mud. I know that being up along the DMZ, you've got that red clay, that red dirt. I mean, it's very
Mhm.
specific. I mean, how does it feel when you're finally clean to wash away that dirt and grime?
Oh, it's wonderful. I tell you what. Even when we'd find a bomb crater full of water, and we'd get to bathe in it, you know, and not get too clean because by the time you got out, you're muddy again, getting on the banks, getting out of it. But and when I think when I was on R&R, I really soaked. I soaked in the tub until uh, I felt like I was a wrinkle.
Well, and in many ways, that's necessary just because you don't have those luxuries when you're in the field. I mean, even
Right?
if you did go back to Dong Ha, there's no guarantee of hot showers. There's none of that guarantee. There's no guarantee of good
No,
clothing.
no, no. The only showers, they had some makeshift showers in some of the places where it'd be like a gallon bucket with holes in it, and they'd pour water in the with another bucket, pour water in that one. And I've probably done that a couple of times, and it's better than nothing. It really is.
Well, I had a student of mine who was curious. They sent me an email over the Christmas break, and they were curious. Well, how would you take care of your teeth? Because dental hygiene is pretty important. So, what would
Mhm.
process of that?
Well, you carried a toothbrush, and you didn't always have toothpaste. You might have to use soap. You know, it usually had a bar of soap, and the same way with shaving. You know, sometimes we'd shave with just soap, and of course we'd go for weeks without shaving and tending to our teeth and whatever. Probably didn't help mine any because I'm got a lot less now. But yeah, it was difficult. It really was.
Well, that, and I'm sure brushing with soap isn't the most pleasant thing to do in the world either.
No, no, no. You'd rather brush with nothing than soap.
So,
But
getting back to the timeline, so you have the first combat. You stay in the field for a few weeks, and then, if I'm not mistaken, you went to Contien for a short period before Buffalo.
yes, yes, that's where we were whenever we went out to the Buffalo out alone in DMZ. Yeah, that was the first time I was there. I think 3 different times. Uh, that was a short time there. We were just there, and then got assigned probably within, I don't know, days.
So, how would you
Content,
describe Contien? I mean,
Content wasn't a good place to be either. I mean, the enemy really wanted Content because it was a good stronghold, and it was like 3 small hills together, and it was a really good place because it was close to the DMZ. You could see far, and there's just a lot of help to whoever's out there, and you could spot the enemy a lot of times. And it was just and it was a good place, to resupply and whatever you needed to do. But it was so they wanted it so bad they were bombing it daily. I mean, it didn't let up very much the whole time, and they would drop mortars on us, and then while we were there, we'd come out, we'd run in the bunker and let them drop them on us, and then we'd come out, send mortars back in their position, and we were always happy when we seen a secondary explosion because we were pretty sure we hit their ammo, and but that just went on and on. I mean, we had helicopters coming in and bringing supplies and taking out the dead and the wounded pretty much daily because somebody was always getting killed or injured there.
well, and speaking of the amount of activity, and you mentioned the counter battery mortar fire, would that be you 60 millimeter gunners, or would that be the Battalion 81 millimeters?
Well, they had 81s there as well, but where we were, it was the 60s that we used, of course. and the 81s were further back in the middle of the Contian.
Now, speaking of the size of Contian, would there be 2 or 3 companies? Would it be a battalion, or could you put the whole regiment in Contian?
It was usually a battalion size, and we'd rotate out, and another battalion would come in. Yeah.
Now, you've been at Contian a few short days, and then Operation Buffalo begins on June 30th, 1967, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And
Right.
what was the task given to Bravo Company on June 30th?
Well, our mission was to go out along the demilitarized zone out in that particular area and destroy any of the enemy positions, capture whatever we could, destroy any of the enemy that we find, and so we were up for that. We were preparing to go out, and our company commander came around and he says, "Well, I want to warn you guys that there have been 5 battalion of the NBA spotted out along the demilitarized zone, but where y'all are going, I don't think you'll see any of them." Well, that's pretty scary to hear that. I mean, 5 battalion, that's 5,000 enemy, and we're going out 150 Marines, and so that is a good reason for prayer right there, because it has you thinking and wondering, well, they're out there, but we might not see them, but we know they're out there. So it was pretty scary thinking about it.
Well,
Anyway, we packed up and headed out.
Well, and just think about the math on that. I mean, being told that there's 5 battalions that have been seen moving and that you're going to be in the vicinity. I mean, in many ways, it's got to be demoralizing too, knowing that if you get into a fight out there, I mean, you're outgunned, outnumbered at every single aspect. I mean,
Absolutely.
what can you do in that situation?
About the only thing you can do is what I already said, pray about it. Because I mean, you can't really refuse. I mean, you could, I guess, but you're going anyway. And it was just it really worked on your mind a lot. Yeah. But we were just doing our job, whatever was required.
Well, and I know that, we've mentioned this before, but hearing that you're going to possibly see 1 NVA battalion, let alone 5, as a married man and as a soon-to-be father, I mean, that's got to be a daunting feeling to realize that, you're in the most dangerous place in the world right now.
That's right. And the 2 things that I feared was I really didn't fear death because I was a Christian, but I didn't want to leave my wife and child, and so that works on your mind quite a bit, and it keeps you thinking about it, but you go on.
And you do what a Marine's supposed to do.
Right. Yeah.
Now, what time did you guys set out from Contian, the June 30th?
It was sometime during the day, probably late morning, I would guess. I have a hard time remembering exactly when, but we set out. We had a new commander, Captain Coates, and we were just going out to do what we were instructed to do, see what we could do, and hopefully not find all those that they were telling us were out there.
Well, and the route that Bravo Company ends up taking, that intersects with Route 561, if memory serves me correctly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 Right out along the demilitarized zone, and I think we were out couple of days, just, you know, and we did find a lot of enemy positions and what have you, and we destroyed them. And on the second night, we were trying to set up our camp, but we were hearing a lot of mortar rounds, explosions, and all in the distance. And so we had got set up, got everything ready. We were ready for the night, and our company commander comes around and he says, "I don't feel this is the right place for us to be, and it's getting dark." He said, "We're going to move. We're going to move camp." And you just don't normally do that at night, you know, because it's dark. Dark in Vietnam is really dark. There aren't any street lights. All you got is the moon. And if you're in the brush, the moon has trouble getting in. But anyway, we were hearing all the explosions, and we were kind of wondering, you know, if do they think we're down there, or are they looking for us, or what? And so this went on. We didn't sleep too much that night. We were pretty much on 75, 100% alert. And the next morning, we actually found out they had determined where we were going to be going some way, and figured that out. And they had set up an ambush for us. And this 5 battalion that we wasn't supposed to encounter, we were about to encounter them. And we did about, I don't know, along about 9 o'clock in the morning. And it was pretty devastating because we were so outnumbered. I mean, it was like we were in the middle. They were all around us, and we had no place to go. Our first battalion, or our first, our first group that went in, just basically wiped out, our first platoon. And the second platoon, which we were a part of, they were pretty much wiped out as well, except for a few, and my mortar section. And we ended up, me and my assistant gunner, we had fired off all of our mortar rounds, and we knocked out some of their positions, I think about 3 positions. And then we were down to the point to where we were firing our mortar pretty much straight up in the air, because they were just right, you know, close. And we used up all of our ammo, all of our mortar rounds. And we were in this bomb crater, and I decided, we can't stay here. I told my assistant gunner, I said, we got to get out of here, or we're going to be killed or captured. And so we determined that he would cover me, and I would run, try to get with the rest of our guys. And so I jumped up, took off. He raised up, fired 1 round. His rifle jammed because he had it in the dirt. And so I was just running like crazy, trying to get to the next position. And the grenades were going off at close around me, and the bullets were digging up the dirt around me. And I'm thinking, man, this is it. But I kept going, and actually made it without getting injured. And I run onto about 3 of our other guys, and then we ended up locating some more, and we finally got to where, and well, we got Tom out, my assistant gunner, we got him out. But anyway, we ended up with about 8 of us, and we got set up along this trail, because we knew they were coming for us. And we were pretty much, I guess, making our last stand, because, you know, it looked bad. And as they were coming in, as they came in, we would try to shoot them. And this one, he was so big, I think he was Chinese. And anyway, I ended up having to shoot him with my 45, but it didn't kill him. And I hollered at my friend Ronnie across the aisle, and Ronnie, he just reacted like a crazy Marine, and he jumped right out in the aisle, rolling and firing and killing the enemy. But in the meantime, Ronnie was shot twice, but he saved me, kept me from getting shot. And the battle just kept on going. They were using flamethrowers, setting the grass on fire, trying to flush us out. And we had at one point I looked up and a grenade was coming at me, and I just hit the ground, covered my face, went off over my head, filled my ears with shrapnel, and then one of our guys killed him. And so we were just working together, trying to make our way out, trying to get back to the landing zone. And I was helping one of our Marines that got shot in the hip, trying to help him get out to a safe place. And we had a mortar attack, and that's when I got shrapnel in my arm to the point that I was afraid I'd lost it, because we were just hugging the ground and hugging each other, hoping it would stop. And anyway, I got shrapnel in my arm, and I managed to pick out all the shrapnel except for like 3 small pieces, and they're still there. They're my souvenirs, I guess. And the battle raged on pretty much all day. We were calling for help, trying to get more support, and eventually we did, but it was long in the afternoon before we did, and we finally got other companies coming in to help us out, and we had our airstrikes. We finally got them in. They were dropping bombs and napalm, and that napalm is so bad. I mean, it was close to us because we were pretty much calling the strikes in on our position, and because that's where the enemy were. And but the napalm sucks all the oxygen out of the air. You can't breathe. It's just you just can't breathe. And I thought we were going to die, just suffocating, but we didn't. And that's and then we had 4 tanks came in to help us out, and 2 of them got knocked out just right off. And the other 2 were really, really helpful. One of them ran over my mortar because I couldn't get to it, and we didn't want the enemy to get it. And we ended up getting out of there with one mortar. That's what we had for a while. But anyway, at the end of the day, we had 59 of our Marines had been killed, and another 65 had been critically wounded. And I was trying to help to get our wounded out on the helicopter, and we were loading them, and they tried to get me on, but I told them I was fine. They said, "No, you're wounded. Get on." And I did look pretty bad, I guess, because I had blood running down my face on both sides, and I had running down my arm. And then I had helped some of our wounded Marines. Of course, they had their blood on me, and we were covered in dirt and debris from the bombs. And we just thought we looked pretty pitiful, I'm sure. But anyway, I finally convinced them that I was all right. And they did take my name, and I later received a Purple Heart. Actually, I received it in the mail after I got home. But we had it was a long day, really long day. And at the end of the day, we had all this help and had calmed the battle down somewhat. And some of the enemy had retrieved, and we were trying to get our dead loaded on tanks so we could get them out. And our whoever was in charge at the time, I guess it was Sergeant Burns, because all of our officers had been killed, and said anybody from Bravo Company get on the tanks. And so we got on the tanks with the dead that we had loaded, and hauled them back to Compton Inn. And it was a rough ride, just trying to keep all the dead from falling off the tanks. And it was a rough day. It was a rough day.
Well, I know in the conversation you mentioned, of course, the tanks in itself, and I'm sure that that has to be traumatizing to have to ride on a tank with guys you were chatting with, days prior to, who they're now dead, their bodies
Oh,
mutilated. I mean, you've got that, and then you've still got the shock of the fact of processing of what you just went through.
right, right. Yeah, we had many of our good buddies were right there, and so many of them. I mean, like you say, they were mutilated, and they had lost arms and legs and heads, and, just it was a sad situation. But we were trying to get them back to Conti so they could be tagged and identified.
Well, and I mean, and this is the deadliest day for any Marine rifle company in Vietnam.
Right,
Bravo Company walks in to this ambush at the marketplace or the Market Square Massacre with 150 Marines, and 26 of you were able to walk out.
right. And all of that 26, I think we had one that hadn't been wounded. The rest have been wounded at least once, some several times. Of course, I'd been wounded a couple of times, and so we were a pretty devastated group.
Well, and that too, I mean, in a single day, 57 your fellow comrades and friends were dead by the end of the day.
Right? Yeah, they were, and we really didn't know who or what till later. And
Well,
many of the guys. The only good thing about it was most of my mortar section guys survived that were with us at the time. Of course, we were short, so we didn't have that many.
well, in many ways too, I know that you mentioned that you firmly believe that that was a interaction from God, that there's no other way that you can explain that for the survival of you and your mortar team in itself, of who does get out. And I
Right.
know that in the book, I think one of the shining points of the book in itself is how you bring in other voices of guys from Bravo, Alpha, and Delta who were either present at the ambush or aided in the relief force. But I know that one of the Marines in here mentioned specifically finding Marine bodies that had been mutilated by the NVA, and he also
Mm-hmm.
found that the wounded were executed, that they had gunshot wounds to the head from where
Oh yeah,
the NVA just walked on top of them and just kept blowing away.
that's what they were doing. Yep, for sure. And I don't know if you read one of our guys. Uh, we had thrown him on the tank because we thought he was dead, and later on he woke up, and he was pinned down and he couldn't get out, and so he ended up sticking his arm out, and somebody noticed movement and pulled him out, and actually he was all right. He was just out, I guess, at the time, and whoever threw him on thought he was dead, and then he ended up back in the battle.
Well, and I know in many ways too, to be unconscious and to wake up under a pile of dead comrades and friends. I mean, that's got to be another hellhole to truly go through, and then to also realize that your friends thought you were dead.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, Roger Good is his name. Yeah.
Well,
He's still around. We still connect.
and I love that fact. It seems a very common theme amongst combat veterans is that you guys have created an unbreakable bond because you've
Mm-hmm.
experienced something that very few have. And
Right.
two, one of the things that struck me about the story of Bravo Company on 2 July 1967 is that the NVA were also wearing flak jackets and using M16s and wearing M1 helmets.
Right. They're taking them off of our dead Marines. Yeah. Actually, the one that I thought was Chinese, he was wearing a flak jacket and a helmet that he had taken off of the Marine. So we had some guys that hesitated because they wasn't sure, and that was their plan.
Well, and I was about to make the comment that in the confusion of battle, that also has to add another factor in of identification, because generally speaking, the NVA are either in khaki or green uniforms, very distinct compared to, of course, what the Marines are wearing. But
Right.
you see somebody coming down a trail in the middle of a firefight, and they're wearing a flak jacket, they've got on a helmet, they've got on green dungarees in itself. Marine, until they get close enough to realize that that's NVA.
Right. Right. And it's hard to shoot somebody that has your uniform on.
Well, that, and I'm sure as well. I mean, it adds to the confusion of an already terrifying situation, because you mentioned this U-shaped ambush, and for viewers, think about the letter U, and then within that U, you've got automatic weapons, you've got machine guns, you've got perhaps mortars set up, and inside the U, Bravo company's right here getting fired at from all sides. And eventually, said the NVA wrap around you, and you're cut off and surrounded. I mean, you call in fire support, but it's right on top of you. You've got no choice. It's utter
Right.
hell.
That's right. Yeah. That's exactly what we did, and that's what happened.
And I found it intriguing reading through this in itself, of the amount of guys from Alpha or Delta who just described the utter shock and awe on the faces of the survivors of Bravo Company. You yourself being one of them, of how big your eyes were, of trying to process utter hell that no training could ever prepare you for.
Right. Right. No way you can be prepared for that.
And you've experienced combat before, but no one in the company's ever experienced anything like this. I mean, you've been in Vietnam for 30 days, and within 30 days, the guys you've been serving with, 26 of them are walking out. You've got 57 dead, you've got 95 plus wounded, and the company's devastated. I mean, it truly is. You have no officers. So, I mean, the company itself on the TO&E, it's not worth fighting standard anymore. It's below strength, but beyond the bare minimum.
Yeah, that's right. But you have to keep on going.
And I think one of the things that's interesting about you, Derl, is that you're a devout Christian. It's in the book. We've talked about it. But I know there's a statement in here of where you mentioned that people stated after the war that they couldn't kill anyone. And even as a religious man, from what we're taught, that killing is a sin. But in a situation like this, I think you described it perfectly, is that when someone's trying to kill you and actively do it, it's different, because they have a purpose in trying to harm you, and it makes it easier to deal with.
That's right. Yeah, if someone's trying to kill you, you got a decision to make, and you got to make it quick. That's just like if someone broke into your house, they're abusing your wife or your child, and you have a gun. What are you going to do? I mean,
Well, and
not something you hope will ever happen, but
absolutely. But you make an excellent point, though. I mean, you witness that. It's different. It's not just walking up to somebody in the side of the street and just shooting them for the hell of it. You have a purpose here. You're not just defending your life. You're also fighting for the guys around you. You're fighting for survival.
That's right. Yeah.
And I think another highlighting point of the book is the statement you make about the NVA, as the fact that they just weren't serving a tour of duty, that they were fighting for something that they believed in. And you mentioned, how do you kill an ideology? How do you kill a belief when they truly valued what they were fighting for? Because you mentioned it, the Marines I've talked to mention it, you guys all wanted to go home at the end of your tour. But for NVA and Viet Cong, they were in this for their belief of uniting their country under a communist flag. And the only way to do that was to complete their mission or to die trying.
Yeah, they're in it for the end. Whatever. Yeah.
And as somebody who, you're in country for 13 months, you were only there for 10 in itself. But I mean, you can't win a war that way. When you're constantly rotating back home, the mission in itself is changing. There's different values. It becomes a difficult thing to process as a Marine that's witnessing this on the ground.
Yeah, and the other thing is you can't win a war when the politicians are running it from back here. You need to let the military take care of it.
Absolutely. And I think that I believe, I don't think actually, but that's, a prime example of World War II. Decisions were made on the battlefield, or at least in theater, where they were seeing a direct impact, versus with Vietnam, politicians in DC, some 8,000 miles away, were making decisions that impacted the lives of men like yourself that were on the ground.
Right. And like at the end, when we had them on the run, and our politicians got scared because people were protesting and all that was going on, and decided to get out. I personally think if we'd have went in to win the war and gave it everything we had, we could have early on. Didn't have to take all that time, but it didn't work that way.
No, but thankfully here we are. And to wrap out this second session for our interview, when you were on the tanks being brought back, what was your mindset, Derl? Like, were you able to process what had just happened?
Not really, I don't think, because my mind was just going in 1,000 different directions, and wondering if it was over or did we have more. Well, we did have more. We ended up back at Conti and being on the line there, and still the bombs and all were coming in, the mortars. But and we had other battles, the skirmishes that we dealt with, and it was just pretty devastating, with all these guys that had been killed, and the way they looked, and it was, we brought out several, but we did not bring out all of our dead, and they were other companies were going in for days later, bringing out our dead. That's pretty devastating. Yeah.
Well, and for folks who don't know or haven't been in that situation, when a body lays out for a day, it's bad with the heat and the bloating. But for several days, especially in the heat of South Vietnam, especially with the continuous fighting, the mutilations to it, it's horrible. I mean,
it is. It really is.
And then I know this also had to be, morale breaking, because your chain of command's gone. There's 26 of you who walked out, and now Bravo Company gets filled with replacements fresh from the United States.
That's right. Yeah, and that was a scary thing as well. They had all these new guys that we somewhere or another had to get trained for Vietnam, because we're trained in the States, but it's different when you get there.
Well, and with this being said too, considering what you've just been through, you knew several of the Marines that were killed and weren't going home.
Right.
To an extent, how did you feel about the replacements? Did you want to make friends with them? Did you want to get to know them after what you just went through?
Well, you kind of had that thought, do I really want to know this guy, because he may not be around, very long. But we did make some friends. I had some friends after that. I had one friend that came in. We're still friends today, and we have met actually. He lives in he lived in New England, New Jersey at the time that we met. But anyway, yeah, you make friends, but you are a little bit concerned in the fact that you just don't know who's going to be around. Don't know really if you're going to be around.
Well, and especially considering the operations along the DMZ, you were warned about the possibility of bumping into 5 NVA battalions, and you did, and it was devastating. And because Bravo Company is not the only company that gets chewed up in this. Alpha Company gets hit pretty hard. Charlie and Delta both did.
That's right. They came in and tried to help us and got involved in it, for sure.
And through that too, this is a day that changes your life forever. When people think about the weekend or the week of July 4th, a lot of them think about Independence Day, celebrating our country. But for you, And many of the other survivors of Operation Buffalo, your thoughts go back to July 2nd, and that's a day that is forever with you.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is. Doesn't go away.
Well, and that's one of the things that in another interview series I've been doing with a forward observer, he mentions specific dates that are forever ingrained in his brain on when friends were killed, when he had to do things that he was asked to do, and the reminder and the remainder of that there. I mean, it applies to you too. I mean, July 2nd is one of those days where, it never goes away.
That's right. My wife and we went to visit the Vietnam Memorial Wall here a few years ago, and I wasn't excited about going because I didn't know if I could handle it emotionally, and it was difficult. It's still difficult but I was privileged to honor those 58,479 veterans that are on that wall, and there's like 749 there from my battalion alone. And then on section 22E are those 59 guys that were killed on July the 2nd during Operation Buffalo. And it's hard. It's hard, but it is a privilege to be able to go. And I always think of all those guys and gals, some women, mostly men that were killed. I think of their families. All that. I just can't hardly imagine what all the families went through. And I know that my family could have gone through it, but thank the Lord they didn't have to. But I know it's got to be devastating to lose someone like that.
Well, and to speak on that too, I mean, just for July 2nd alone, 57 different families across the United States eventually received telegrams stating that, their Marine had been killed in action. And I often think that, people forget about the impact that has upon the family. Even to this day, I mean, visiting the grave marker, whether they're buried here in the United States, in Arlington or another cemetery, even the wall, it's emotional, it's moving. I mean, because, there's 58,400 plus Americans that can no longer share their story. There's 59 Marines who died on Operation Buffalo that cannot share their story. But the blessing in that, in many ways, Derl, is that with your book, with us doing this interview and you speaking out in your community in Arkansas, you continue that legacy for the guys who can't speak for themselves because you share your story. You've got the names in here of the Marines that are no longer with us, and that legacy carries on even today in 2024.
Yes. And you mentioned the telegrams. My wife got one of those telegrams, and I had sent her a letter as quick as I could. I think she got it like in 10 days, telling her that I was okay because she was seeing stuff on the news. And then I don't know, a week or two later, she got a telegram from the Commandant of the Marine Corps and delivered to her door. And she wouldn't take it because she feared, what it said. And she was living with her parents at the time, and she made the guy wait until her parents came home before she would accept it. And I think she was pretty relieved after she read it, realizing because I'd already told her. But time had passed and other things had happened, so she still was unsure of what was going on.
Well,
so even the families back home, they had a hard time with that.
Oh, and I think you bring up a great point about the family perspective. I mean, just because a Marine was killed on July 2nd, the family didn't know that day. I mean, family members were still getting letters, as you mentioned, days afterwards from their loved ones, only to get a telegram stating that, your son's been dead for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, just because of the backlog of information of who's being killed, who's been wounded, and getting that out. And that's also devastating because, family members have sent letters within the previous days or even that day, only to find out that, your son, your husband, your brother, they've been dead for 2 weeks.
That's right, because mail was really slow then. We didn't have the cell phones and all the conveniences that we have now. So it would take 2 or 3 weeks to get a letter.
Well, and with that, to end it out too, for today regarding the letters, I mean, you write this letter, and the letter that you wrote to Marilyn about you being wounded and about Buffalo, what did you put in that letter?
I was just trying to reassure her that I was all right, and trying to tell her a little bit about what happened. And funny thing about our letters, my wife would write me a letter and she'd leave the back blank, and I would write on the back of the letter and send it back to her. And she kept all those letters, so we had probably at least 90% of them. That helped me a lot when I wrote this book, because I could go back to those letters, and if I couldn't remember what was going on at that particular time, so that helped a lot. And but yeah, I was just trying to reassure her that everything was okay. I didn't want her to worry, even though I knew she would.
Well, and
Yeah.
one of the things that I find fascinating is that, you still have this record. I mean, from a historian's perspective, that's an incredible historical record to have. I mean, you can date everything that you were doing at this time period in 1967. And the letters are even mentioned in the book, excerpts of them as well. And I think it's phenomenal that you still have them, and they're treasured as well, because it's a window into a different era.
Right, for sure. Yeah, now we can look back on it.
Well, and with that too, I mean, it allowed us to get to this point right here, to where, I'm able to talk about this, and specifically the impact of your book, but also the story you have here. And it's phenomenal for those who have not purchased the book or even read the book alone. It's a phenomenal account that Derl has written of his time as a mortarman in 1967 with 1-9. And it comes straight from the source itself. It's an excellent primary account of what one man went through.
Yeah, and it's like I tell everybody, it's not a history of Vietnam. It's only my history of what I went through. So I just want people to realize that.
Well, Derl, I will say it's a phenomenal history. And to highlight this again, I think one of the great parts of the book is the other voices you've brought into it from the Marines you served with.
Yeah. Did you like my wife's voice in it?
I did actually. Parts in that it made me chuckle. Little paragraphs of Marilyn's comments, concerns, and rightfully so. But I thought that was a beautiful and a unique touch to bring in your wife, who aided you in this project. I mean, without keeping the letters, who knows how the book would have turned out.
That's right. That's right. And she was one of my good editors too.
Well, Derl, this was a phenomenal interview today, my friend. Happy New Year. I hope that 2024 brings you and I both blessings throughout the entire year, as well as your wife, Marilyn, and of course your service dog. We can't forget her.
That's right. Little Gracie.
So, as always, thanks for your service, Derl. Welcome home.
Well, thank you very much for the interview. I appreciate it. And I hope somebody out there, it will help somebody.
Well, that's an excellent way to end this one today. And thank you, everybody that's going to watch this and check this out for more. Derl and I have a long story to go through still. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.